LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the November 8th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be an informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see from the title of my video, the main topic is Biden infrastructure win while wokeness wrongly gets election loss blame, which is kind of a long way of saying that on last Tuesday, as I talked about in last Monday's media mix-up, last Tuesday there were some off-year elections, Virginia, New Jersey, some other places, and the Democrats lost the governorship of Virginia, as they often do in off-year elections when Democrats hold the White House, held on to the governorship of New Jersey, first governor to Democratic governor to win re-election in New Jersey in I can't remember, since like the 1970s or something. So that was good news, I guess, but the lens that the media put the whole thing through is, it's warning signs for the Democrats, and there were definitely warning signs, and I'll get to that when I get to the news summaries. And then, of course, the infrastructure deal. I've been talking about the bipartisan infrastructure deal along with the Democrat-only reconciliation Build Back Better bill for weeks and weeks and weeks. Well, the first half of that passed the House. It had already passed the Senate, and so all it needs now is Biden's signature, and it's $1.2 trillion, and I'll also discuss that through the news summaries. I'm going to really heavily criticize the guest host of Fox News Sunday, Bill Hemmer, talking about the issue of children separated by the Trump administration from their parents and whether they deserve to be compensated for the cruelty that was inflicted on them. It's been a big Fox News talking point for the last week, and Bill Hemmer, I think Cedric Richmond, the senior Biden advisor, who I have a couple clips from this week, does really well responding to Bill Hemmer. I think he gets the clip of the week. Usually I give the clip of the week to the anchor who does the best questioning, but in this case it's Cedric Richmond for the best answer to biased questioning from an anchor, I guess. And then at the end, I'll have the Surgeon General Vivek Murthy talking about the new mandate that workplace requirement put out by OSHA that workplaces with over 100 employees have to vaccinate their employees or have them tested weekly for unvaccinated employees. Anyway, that was kind of a long-winded introduction, and I should say that I do have a political comedy clip from Saturday Night Live. This is the beginning of Weekend Update, where both Colin Jost and Michale Che addressed what I consider my main topics, the two main topics that are in my title, the infrastructure win and the election loss. And I will play that brief beginning of Weekend Update and talk about it with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Our top story tonight, like it's been for as long as I can remember, infrastructure. Last night, the House passed President Biden's $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, which should be enough to clean as many as 2 of LaGuardia's bathrooms. The infrastructure bill will also expand internet access across the U.S., which is great news because when has more internet ever been bad for America?
Democrat Terry McAuliffe lost to Republican Glenn Younkin in the Virginia governor's race, but on the bright side, losers from Virginia usually get a statue. Political experts say that the Republican victory in Virginia's governor's race was fueled by support from white women who didn't go to college, which just so happens to be the same exact group I target on Tinder.
Now, those jokes were okay, but I liked especially those last two jokes from Michale Che, I found them interesting, I guess, because they were both kind of about race, but not really about the race issue that was the issue in Virginia, the whole critical race theory in education that I talked about a lot last week, and I'm not going to go back over that again. But you can see the source of all of my clips at links down in the video description, including that entire weekend update segment on the Saturday Night Live YouTube channel for free. I'm now going to go from the political comedy to the actual political news, the 5 different news summaries from the big 5 corporate outlets, juxtaposed from longest to shortest. And they're actually all quite different this week. And again, I guess I'll overuse the word interesting, but in interesting ways. They all have their own perspective. They're looking at the same news events through different lenses, and it's not just left and right. It's sort of like, I don't know, just different journalistic choices that are interesting, that I will talk about after we've watched this first one from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz is doing this thing. She starts off introducing the same news stories, the off-year election losses, the bipartisan infrastructure deal, etc. But then they have this ongoing news thing that ABC is doing where they talk to voters and constituents in some swing states. You'll see they'll go down like the eastern seaboard for like Virginia, North Carolina, Florida. And I mean, in some ways it's interesting, as I was saying, but I think that I'm always kind of skeptical when you just ask random people for their opinions and, like 2 people per state or 3 people per state. Like, are you really giving people a broad perspective on what's going on by talking to those few people? Sometimes they're like just random citizens. Sometimes they are involved in the political process. But anyway, we can watch it together and you can tell me what you think about this reporting style. Martha Raddatz first giving the introduction, then like going on a car trip, I don't know if she went by car, but going on a road trip through some swing states and talking about it, or talking to voters that we can then talk about after we watch together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. After months of mind-numbing negotiations, countless meetings, and multiple missed deadlines, President Biden's massive bipartisan infrastructure package cleared the House late Friday. In a surprise twist, 13 Republicans supported the bill, enough to make up for 6 progressive holdouts. Democrats have struggled to find unity, facing increased pressure to act after this week's major wake-up call, suffering a stinging defeat in Virginia and just barely holding on to the governor's mansion in New Jersey. President Biden acknowledging the message that was loud and clear: get something done. But the results of those races were a bright red warning signal that could spell trouble for Democrats in the midterm elections. With those critical midterms 1 year away and control of Congress at stake, we hit the road, partnering with our owned stations and affiliates, traveling through key southern states to talk face-to-face with voters. A stunning victory for Republicans in Virginia.
All righty, Virginia, we won this thing!
For the first time in more than a decade, a Republican winning statewide office in the Commonwealth, as many frustrated suburban voters who supported Biden in 2020 turned out instead for the GOP, with a potential new playbook for Republicans in next year's midterms. Less focus on Donald Trump and more on fundamentals, education, jobs, and the effects of the pandemic.
He campaigned on the strong issues that people really cared about.
It was a rallying cry we heard again and again as we hit the road and headed south, traveling almost 1,000 miles through 3 battleground states where much is at stake in next year's midterms. First up, North Carolina. Trump won here by fewer than 2 percentage points, but in 2022, the state has an additional congressional seat and a Senate seat up for grabs. Here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, on Wednesday morning, voters were waking up to the reality up north, knowing it could reverberate throughout the South. For Democrats,
it's very concerning.
For Republicans like farm owner Susan Weaver Ford, the vote was to be expected.
To replace that combine, that one combine, you're looking at $600,000.
For Ford, it is all about issues that hit close to home.
Things that deal with us a lot are labor issues, specifically the H-2A labor program, and it eats into what little bit of profit we are trying to make.
Daycare owner Cassandra Brooks voted for Trump in 2016 and Biden in 2020. The things that matter most to her, education and children.
When he said he believes in the soul of this nation, I really believe he humbly cares about the people. You know, we still have some people are divided, but I can still say that we are still moving forward. Ross Turnmeyer was conflicted on who to support in 2020. And as a dad and business owner, his priorities are both the economy and COVID.
Economic stability is important. You think about supporting a family, 3 kids, and how COVID impacts our day-to-day.
And he is frustrated by the division in the country.
If I asked you to describe America under Donald Trump, how would you describe it?
A lot of folks on edge and in divided camps and kind of always in that state of who's out to get me.
And how would you describe America under Joe Biden?
Exactly the same.
From North Carolina on to Georgia, one of the most critical battleground states, tipping slightly blue with record voter turnout in the 2020 election and the subsequent Senate runoffs that shifted the balance of power in Congress. What issues are important to you? The economy, how people handle the pandemic, what's important?
Everything's important.
I personally think that America has to get back more to the middle.
Conservative Rule Joyner also thinks the party should concentrate on policy, not former President Trump.
And I think with the president staying out of this and they talk more about conservative values and less about personalities, you had a higher turnout.
But Trump's baseless election fraud claims paved the way for new voting restrictions in Georgia that some worry will have an effect on midterms and turnout.
What we're witnessing right now is a fundamental, well-funded attack on American democracy and on Americans' ability to participate in our elections.
From Georgia, we continued south to Florida. The historically purple state, growing increasingly red, will also gain a congressional seat next year. Here in Duval County on Florida's East Coast, Joe Biden won in 2020, the first Democratic presidential candidate to win here in more than 40 years. But now it's the Republicans who are gloating. Describe to me your feelings when you heard about especially Virginia.
We were overjoyed because we know what that means.
And what does that mean?
Well, that means the Democrats are in big trouble.
And for Democrats,
it was gut-wrenching.
Daniel Henry is the chair of the Democratic Party in Duval County and blames Washington for that Republican victory in Virginia.
People are really looking for progress, for the Build Back Better agenda to actually be passed and fulfilled. And I think the midterm election obviously has shown Democrats that you can't just run on Trump. You have to vote and run on ideas and a platform that people really resonate with.
As Democrats desperately try to find ways to close the gap in Florida as they face mounting hurdles like low voter registration and being outspent.
They realize that they have a difficult task because this is a very complex state. Generational shifts are taking place, and they're losing a bit of grip on the Latino vote, which is one of the fastest growing portions of our electorate.
A lot of those younger Latino voters swinging to the right.
We need Republicans that aren't necessarily pro-Trump or anti-Trump, but that can activate that same Trump base.
And Florida Democratic voters, both progressives and moderates, increasingly frustrated with the political infighting in their party.
The Democratic Party needs to come together. I mean, they have a majority in the House and the Senate, but they can't get things done because they can't agree on what they're trying to do.
And the roundtable is here now to make sense of it all.
Yeah, that news summary there was almost 7 minutes long, and there were a couple experts sprinkled in there. There was like the chair of the Duval County Democratic Party, and there was that professor in Florida at the end. But like I said, I'm very suspicious of these like so-called man on the street or woman on the street interviews where I don't know what kind of vetting process they go through to pick the, like, what was that, like maybe 2 or 3 people per state who are supposed to let us know what everybody in the state is thinking, or give us a window into what people in the state are thinking. And I don't know. I don't think, even though it's a different lens and an interesting lens to look at it, like I was saying beforehand, I think that it's, in the end, it's a warped lens. It's a through a lens darkly. I don't know how to, like, I think I've overstretched that metaphor or whatever, but it's just, I don't think it gives you, I think it gives you in some ways more a look at like the ABC News selection process than what people in those states are actually thinking, but maybe they've done a lot of like groundwork and they know these people really are representative. But I'm just very skeptical. You can let me know what you think about that particular type of news coverage there from ABC. And it seemed like ABC was really did not have a lot of newsmaker guests this week. I have the Vivek Murthy clip, and they did this good thing on climate change later, so I have to give them kudos for that. But they had that long, like, road trip through the South there, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, looking at those voters. And then they go to this long roundtable discussion. And, yeah, I don't know, maybe they couldn't get good guests. But anyway, that's my criticism or perspective on the first and longest of the news summaries from ABC that, like I said, is a little bit different. And then the next news summary is usually I have NBC News Meet the Press as first. It's not even first or second this week. Chuck Todd does not have the biggest, longest package this week. I guess Martha Raddatz had the biggest, longest package this week. That whole pre-recorded road trip through the South. But NBC News Meet the Press, I think it's probably the best. I'm sorry. The next one is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, since Meet the Press is not the longest or second longest. Wait. Ugh. We just watched the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary from Martha Raddatz, and the next one is NBC News Meet the Press, which is just a hair longer than the CBS one. I'm looking at my notes here, and I apologize for that. But the NBC News Meet the Press one, even though it's not the biggest, longest package, I think it is probably the best of the perspectives, unless you think COVID or climate change are the most important stories. But, I mean, that would be my criticisms of NBC News Meet the Press, which I've pre-criticized here, and now I will play that news summary that we can talk about a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. So what happened to Democrats on Tuesday goes far beyond the defeat of Terry Mcauliffe in Virginia or Governor Phil Murphy's narrow escape in New Jersey. If you look at it from coast to coast, it was a warning to Democrats that their congressional majorities are in grave danger. Terry Mcauliffe, running for his old job as governor in Virginia, fell a net 12.5 points off of Mr. Biden's 2020 victory in that state. Even in victory, Governor Phil Murphy's net loss in New Jersey compared to what Biden got in 2020 was roughly 13 points. Kind of familiar. So what happened? Was the standoff between progressives and moderates partly to blame? Probably. Did President Biden misread his mandate? Many Democrats think he did. Was the public's sense that the country was on the wrong track a factor? Clearly. That said, on Friday, Mr. Biden followed up the Democratic drubbing with one of the best days he's had in office yet. The strong October employment report with over 500,000 jobs added in a month, best showing since July. And the House passage, finally, of the long-delayed $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill, which of course is one of the pillars of the president's agenda. Still, as Democrats pick through the rubble of Tuesday's election, Republicans are partying like it's 2009. Remember that year? That was 1 year before they ended up flipping 63 Democratic House seats.
All the talk about the elections and what do they mean, they want us to deliver.
After a devastating loss for Democrats in Virginia.
All righty, Virginia, we won this thing!
And a surprising nail-biter in New Jersey. Democrats are sounding alarm bells, worried a toxic national environment could cost them control of Congress in midterm elections next year.
If you're a Democrat and President Biden won your seat by 16 points, you're in a competitive race next year. You are no longer safe.
Late Friday night, after 2 failed attempts to bring it to the floor, the House finally passed the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill, 228 to 206.
The motion is adopted.
With 6 Democrats voting against it and 13 Republicans bucking their party leadership to put the bill over the line.
Finally, Infrastructure Week.
Most House progressives supported the measure, which they had been holding up, hoping to extract more spending on a larger social safety net and climate change bill. After a pledge from moderates that they would hold a vote on the bill by November 15th, provided it does not add 1 cent to the deficit.
We're going to trust each other because the Democratic Party is together on this.
The whole day was a cluster, right? But beyond that, I thought everyone was working in a very congenial way.
I feel confident that we will have enough votes to pass the Build Back Better plan.
What gives you that confidence?
Me.
Passage also followed a push by President Biden, who made personal phone calls to both progressives and moderates on Friday.
Do you think that Terry McAuliffe would have won if your agenda had passed before Election Day?
Well, I think we should have passed before Election Day, but I'm not sure that I would be able to have changed the number of very conservative folks who turned out in the red districts who were Trump voters, but maybe.
Look, congressional Dems for Terry McAuliffe.
There is no way that you can say that a 12-point swing in a state is due to Congress not passing a bill.
Meanwhile, some Democrats are urging the party to scale back the size and scope of their social spending agenda.
This is not a center-left or a left country. We are a center, if anything, as a little center-right country.
You can't win in Virginia if you only appeal to very liberal voters.
While others blame the economy and inflation. In exit polls, 53% of Virginians said they disapproved of President Biden's job performance. Can Republicans galvanize support next year by seizing on the culture war issues which propelled Glenn Younkin's campaign?
In terms of concerns about education at the local level, he touched a nerve.
And will Republicans in blue and purple states borrow Younkin's approach, supporting Donald Trump while staying personally at a distance?
We stayed away from being negative and divisive, and we brought people together.
Well, joining me now is the President's Chief of Staff, Ron Klain. Mr. Klain, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
And I will have a clip of Chuck Todd's interview with Ron Klain where he basically asks him if the Democratic Party is too woke, although I think he actually uses the word progressive. I have 2 other clips of Democrats being asked if the Democratic Party is too woke, which I think is a totally wrong framing. And I mean, the answer is no. And even just the use of the word woke is as a pejorative. I mean, who even calls themselves woke? It's just like something that they use on Fox News and various other places as shorthand for all these things people don't like about people on the left or progressives. And I don't think it's a useful word, but I guess it's useful if that's what you want to do. But anyway, there was that framing there, and but in the pre-recorded package, Chuck Todd, I think, at least gave some good facts where to debunk the framing. Talking about the infrastructure, whether the infrastructure bill's lack of passage affected the results in the Virginia election. I think that's kind of stupid. And you saw progressive caucus leader in the House of Representatives, Pramila Jayapal, quoted saying, passing a bill isn't going to fix a 12-point swing, from the 2020 election to this 2021 off-year election. And it had a lot to do with turnout, that Younkin was able to turn out Trump's voters and even a little more in some places, while Terry McAuliffe was not able to turn out as many voters as Joe Biden had in 2020. And I saw along the way, I was reading the live comment. Lulu Girl said back at 3:24 p.m. McAuliffe wasn't very exciting, pretty duddy actually. And that's true. Terry McAuliffe was a bad candidate. He was also a centrist candidate. So how you can blame that on being too progressive or wokeness makes no sense whatsoever. If you remember last week, I was saying I remember Terry McAuliffe as Bill Clinton's money guy, and he is associated with the Clintons, and Bill Clinton especially, and Hillary Clinton, I guess. But Bill Clinton was like the DLC, Democratic Leadership Council Committee, I can't even remember, back in the late 80s, early 90s, that was supposed to bring the Democratic Party back to the center, and it was the right wing of the Democratic Party. So McAuliffe was, I never liked him. I said that last week before the election, and I'll say it again. He was kind of a sleazy money guy for the Clintons. I didn't like him when he became governor of Virginia, so he was a bad candidate. And Glenn Younkin was kind of a stealth Trump in some ways, or he was able to use the racist Republican talking points on critical race theory while still seeming like a nice, sunny, affable guy. And that's one of the secrets of having really extreme views, is you have to be like really affable and have a sunny disposition and a nicer temperament. Trump could never do that. That was one of Trump's big failures, is that he couldn't make right-wing extremism look like Ronald Reagan could. That was one of Ronald Reagan's superpowers, was he always seemed like a nice guy when he was doing really terrible things. And anyway, the what was that last note I was going to... I talked about that. The other thing I wanted to say about people who are saying they should have passed the infrastructure deal before the off-year elections, the Virginia election, and I actually think that would have been really bad, because it wouldn't have changed the results. Like Pramila Jayapal said, it's not going to change a 12-point swing, but if they passed it right before the election, on Fox News they're already blaming, progressive overreach and big spending is why they lost the election. If they passed that bill before the election, and then it would have been like good news, bad news, instead of now it's like bad news on Tuesday and then good news over the weekend, it would have been much worse politically for Biden, because it would have been easier to say the election was a rejection of the bill that just got passed. But anyway, I want to get on to the next news summary. This is CBS News Face the Nation. I've sometimes said CBS should be called the COVID broadcasting system, because they give the most coverage to COVID. And a lot of times it's the most important story, although now they're saying that we may be past COVID, you'll see in this news summary from Margaret Brennan and Mark Strassmann. And then at the very end, Margaret Brennan comes back and does a really good summary of what's in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. On this crisp fall morning in Washington, it finally feels like we're starting to move beyond the pandemic on a number of fronts. But before we begin, we want to note the sobering milestone that the U.S. reached last week. 750,000 Americans dead from COVID-19. Our senior national correspondent, Mark Strassmann, reports about the optimism that some are feeling, and it starts with our nation's children.
Can you put your hands up in the air and say I'm halfway there? Halfway there!
One shot down, one to go, as Pfizer's pediatric vaccine sinks into the arms of kids 5 to 11.
Awesome job!
I thought it would hurt, but it didn't.
That rollout boosted a 72-hour good news cycle, an overall overdue sense of breakthrough.
This is going to be the end of the pandemic, the moment that get the kids vaccinated.
Surveys show most parents want someone else's kid to go first, but to others, their child gets the shot, they get relief.
I've just been so scared, so sorry, I'm a little emotional. I just wanted them to be safe.
More progress. Experimental antiviral pills to treat COVID patients. Pfizer and pharmaceutical company Merck have drugs in late-stage trials that stop the virus from replicating. Both need FDA approval. But Pfizer says even among high-risk patients, its pill reduces by 89% the chance of hospitalization or death. Companies with at least 100 employees face a new mandate. Make sure workers are fully vaccinated or tested regularly. Otherwise, face stiff OSHA fines. Potentially affected 84 million employees, roughly 1/3 of whom are believed to be unvaccinated. In a rhapsody of resentment, at least 26 states have sued the Biden administration, and a federal appeals court has blocked implementation.
We won't stand for it. OSHA has never used its authority like this, and it's absurd.
Enforcement could be a problem. OSHA doesn't have an army of inspectors to go from company to company. Instead, it may have to rely on whistleblowers, workers willing to expose their non-compliant employers. For many employers put in a tough spot, here's the positive. Their deadline is January 4th, after the December holidays, when companies like UPS want to add workers.
The company is trying to hire 100,000 seasonal employees nationwide.
Both Amazon and Walmart want to hire 150,000 seasonal workers. Target 100,000, FedEx 90,000. That's on top of October's upbeat jobs report released on Friday. More than 500,000 workers joined payrolls.
I think economists are pleased with this report. Shows a nice bounce back after somewhat weakened reports in the previous 2 months.
America's unemployment rate down to 4.6%. Rising consumer prices remain worrisome. But for many Americans eager for a pick-me-up, that's a worry for next week.
Our Mark Strassmann reporting from Atlanta. President Biden's $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill is finally headed to the White House for his signature. It contains $110 billion for repairing roads and bridges across the country, as well as money for public transit and railway systems and for upgrading the nation's water systems. The bill includes funding to expand internet access and to pay for green energy projects like charging stations for electric cars. We turn now to Senior Advisor to the President, Cedric Richmond. He joins us from New Orleans. Good morning to you.
And like I said, I have two Cedric Richmond clips coming up. I do like the summary at the end. As I said before, I showed the clip from Margaret Brennan of what's in the infrastructure bill. One criticism I have of it, and also you'll see kind of the same list from the Fox News Sunday news summary from Bill Hemmer and Lucas Tomlinson, who I don't think I've ever seen Lucas Tomlinson before that I recall. But one criticism I have of that summary and the one you're going to see in the next clip is you look at the numbers there and you add them up. I don't even think they come to like 500 billion or certainly not. There's like at least half the bill is missing. I wonder where the rest of the money went. You think if you're going to give a long list, you'd like at least show where a majority of the spending's going, and I don't think that list did. The Mark Strassmann report and Margaret Brennan talking about going beyond COVID, the only criticism, I think that it is an important story. The beyond COVID part I'm a little skeptical of, especially it's pretty US-centric. COVID is still raging in a lot of the world where the vaccination rates are a lot lower than they are here, and usually Face the Nation has a report from Elizabeth Palmer, like last week they did from Eastern Europe, and they were showing how bad things were in Romania. And as long as COVID's raging out there, it's not over. If it's not over there, it's not really over here, because that's just like a pool for COVID to replicate and mutate, and that I think is bad framing on the part of CBS. I do appreciate that they mentioned the 750,000 U.S. deaths, though it's again U.S.-centric, doesn't talk about I think there are like 4 million deaths worldwide, more than that. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that. But anyway, that's my criticism or media criticism and commentary on that last clip. And I sort of pre-criticized the Lucas Tomlinson report a little bit. There's this weird part of this next, the Fox News Sunday news summary, where they like point out, that bipartisan infrastructure bill couldn't have passed without Republicans. Like, that's why it's the bipartisan infrastructure deal, but they like make that point really strongly. Well, because some House Republicans voted for it, but people don't even talk about the 19 Senate Republicans who voted for it as well. But anyway, I will talk about the Fox News Sunday news summary from Bill Hemmer and Lucas Tomlinson from yesterday a little more after we watch together over here.
Hello again and welcome. The concept of Infrastructure Week has been a running joke in Washington for some time now, but party infighting has repeatedly tanked big bills. Well, the joke is over. The House, with the help of 13 Republicans, give Mr. Biden a big win. All this coming on the heels of devastating losses for Democrats in Tuesday's elections. In a moment, we'll speak live with White House Senior Advisor Cedric Richmond. But first, I want to turn to Lucas Tomlinson, traveling with the president from Rehoboth Beach in Delaware. Lucas, hello.
Bill, President Biden is calling this a once-in-a-generation opportunity to fix the country's aging infrastructure. The bill would not have passed without Republican support.
Finally, Infrastructure Week.
Both the Senate and the House have now passed the bill, but the president has not yet signed it into law.
I want people who work so hard to get this done, Democrats and Republicans, to be here when we sign it.
Here's what's in the $1.2 trillion bill. $110 billion for roads, bridges, and transformational projects, $66 billion for railways, $65 billion to expand access to high-speed internet, and $50 billion to protect against droughts, floods, and wildfires. 6 Democrats voted against it, led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. 13 Republicans voted for it. The Democrats' progressive wing had blocked the infrastructure bill for months to force a vote on the other massive piece of legislation, the social spending bill, which will now take place after Congress returns the week of November 15th. The White House also upbeat over a better-than-expected jobs report and Pfizer's antiviral COVID pill showing promising results ahead of a new rollout to vaccinate kids aged 5 to 11. But when asked why Republicans won big in Virginia and nearly pulled off an upset in New Jersey, the president pointed the finger at Congress.
I think the one message that came across was get something done.
Not long after arriving here in Rehoboth Beach, President Biden's COVID-19 vaccine mandate was blocked by a federal appeals court. The administration says it will defend it in court. Bill?
Thank you, Lucas. Lucas Tomlinson reporting from Delaware. Nice to see you today. With me now, Senior Advisor to the President, Cedric Richmond. And Mr. Richmond, welcome.
And like I said, I will have a clip of Bill Hemmer and Cedric Richmond where I think Cedric Richmond gets the clip of the week for fighting the Fox News bias. But there was some Fox News bias in that last clip, like I said, talking about how the bipartisan infrastructure bill couldn't have passed without Republicans, which, that's why it was bipartisan. And you notice how they talked about how the 13 Republicans voted for it and then the 6 progressive Democrats voted against it. But then they really focused on those 6 progressive Democrats. And I don't know, Fox News loves showing pictures of like AOC and Ilhan Omar and the squad and, the women of color who are out to, take away your country or what. Am I seeing too much in the way we go back? And watch that last clip again with the sound off, and I think you'll see what I mean. It's like scary, scary black women for quite a while in that clip. But anyway, that's my commentary and criticism of the Fox News Sunday news summary. And then the last one is CNN State of the Union, Dana Bash, just the shortest one. Like I said, I'm juxtaposing all 5 of them from longest to shortest. It's just a little over a minute, and I will talk about that minute a little more after we watch together over here.
Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is feeling some whiplash after a bruising election day for Democrats. President Biden spent the weekend celebrating a significant win. Bipartisan passage of his $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, which passed the House overnight Friday with the support of 13 Republicans and gives billions of dollars to the nation's bridges and roads, as well as broadband, water, and energy systems. Saturday, the president heralded a victory, calling it a monumental step forward as a nation. The president is still pushing Democrats on the Hill to pass the other half of his domestic agenda, the $1.75 trillion social spending bill and climate bill. The administration had hoped to pass this legislation together, but the timeline for the larger bill slipped last week after moderates in the House demanded more information on the bill's cost. Joining me now, someone who was deeply involved in the push for the infrastructure bill, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. Thank you so much for joining me.
So a good, very brief news summary, you know, what you can fit in a minute there. And I won't have any Jennifer Granholm clips. She was on a bunch of shows last week, too. She was on a couple last week, a couple this week. The Secretary of Energy, former governor of Michigan, just didn't fit into my topic the way the rest of these newsmaker clips. Like I said, I have, for the newsmaker clips, I'm going to start off with senior Biden advisor Cedric Richmond, one of two clips of Cedric Richmond. You remember, I've talked about this before, you know, James Clyburn, the South Carolina member of the House of Representatives, who was endorsed Biden before the South Carolina primary, and probably is most responsible for Biden winning the Democratic nomination and therefore becoming president by doing that. And, you know, because Biden was losing up to that point, and it really helped push Biden to the front. And then COVID hit and things like locked in place, and things got weird after that. But anyway, as I've talked about before, I remember seeing reporting that the one thing that James Clyburn asked Joe Biden for, you know, because he deserves a lot of payback for what he did in South Carolina, was to have his protege, Cedric Richmond, who was then in the House of Representatives, become a senior advisor to Joe Biden. So I think Cedric Richmond is going places, and that's one of the contexts I wanted to put on the Cedric Richmond clip. I have two clips of Cedric Richmond. I also have Democratic Senator from Virginia, Mark Warner, Biden Chief of Staff Ron Klain, and then at the end I'll have Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. But the first three clips here, the first Cedric Richmond clip, the Mark Warner clip, and the Ron Klain clip, are all about this bogus framing that, you know, the Democratic Party is too woke. And I talked about how, like, wokeness doesn't even mean anything before. But I want to start off with Cedric Richmond talking to... sorry, I have to look at my clip list. This is Cedric Richmond talking to CBS News' Margaret Brennan, first about whether Biden is delivering for his base, and particularly for black people. And that's a good question because, you know, voting rights, the voting rights bill looks like, I don't know what the strategy is to pass it, but it's kind of on the back burner. And police reform, well, Margaret Brennan, I think, overstates the case in this next clip where she says, like, Democrats walked away, when I think you can also blame Republican Tim Scott. But anyway, I'm pre-criticizing the clip as I'm wont to do, and I will talk about this clip a little more after we watch it together over here.
I want to ask you about some things when you look at polling right now. Multiple polls have shown that support from key constituent groups for Democrats has receded a bit, particularly black voters. The administration walked away from police reform. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, as you know, failed this week. How long do black voters have to wait for the president to deliver for them? Because this seems to be a problem in some of these races we saw this past week, particularly in a state like Virginia.
Margaret, and with all due respect, you're just wrong. I mean, let's start here. Congress was unable to come to an agreement on police reform. So you know who acted? The President of the United States and the Department of Justice.
The Democrats walked away from those negotiations.
Well, now are you talking Democrats or are you talking about the president? So you ask about the president, let me finish. The president and DOJ banned chokeholds. The president and DOJ limited to restrictions of no-knock warrant. The president made sure that he is acting when Congress cannot. So if you look at voting rights, we doubled the size of the Voting Rights Division in the Department of Justice so that we could challenge these unconstitutional laws in court.
Democratic strategist James Carville pointed this week to the loss of suburban voters in a state like Virginia, and he said, what went wrong is the stupid wokeness. He argued Democrats are being defined by the progressives. You're not defining your own message, particularly when it comes to issues like the economy. Aren't Republicans using that to their advantage?
Well, the Republicans will use anything to their advantage, whether it's true or not. They're the party of misinformation. We see it with vaccines. We see it with everything. And what they've been able to do is weaponize things and define it in their own way. The president has been very clear. His budget included $300 million more for community policing because we know that every community wants to be safe, while he's talked about making sure that we have significant police reform. And so we're not defined by all of those things out there, but I think that the real issue is not exactly what James is saying. I think it's the fact that the Republicans will weaponize anything, fact or fiction.
So anyway, that was a pretty good answer from Cedric Richmond. And like I said, the framing of wokeness, I think, is a problem. Just the word wokeness, I find a problem, but also blaming the off-year election losses on wokeness, whatever wokeness is, doesn't make sense. I saw this conversation in my Twitter feed. I have a Twitter account, twitter.com/LiberalViewer, and I check people who tweet at me. And I saw, I took a screenshot here. Let me see if I can get, so that I can talk while I show it to you. So yeah, here's a tweet from Terry Alther back on November 5th. He started off tweeting, want your expertise on this. Can AOC sue ABC 13 News for defamation since she never even said what they're saying she said, which was Terry Mcauliffe lost because he wasn't woke enough, when Carville says the opposite. AOC says Terry Mcauliffe lost because he wasn't woke enough. Carville says the opposite. And then you see my other follower here, Nil Gravity, says, I don't think she can sue, but I was just about to ask LiberalViewer to expect this narrative of blaming progressives during his analysis. Also, this link doesn't show it, but a defund the police mayor candidate beat a retired cop Tuesday. I'm not sure where that was. I kind of tried to research that. I think it was maybe in Pittsburgh. I should have checked that out, but if that's where the defund the police mayor candidate beat a retired cop. But I don't think AOC can sue because she didn't use the word woke, but she just said she thought that Terry Mcauliffe was a centrist. He wasn't a progressive, and he didn't activate the base of the Republican Party. There wasn't as much, as I said earlier in the live stream, Glenn Younkin was able to turn out the Trump voters and more, while McAuliffe wasn't able to turn out as many voters as Biden did in 2020. And that's what AOC said. And, of course, for defamation of a public figure under New York Times v. Sullivan, you have to show actual malice. And, what they're doing isn't even really false. It's more like an interpretation of what she said. I guess they put woke in quotes, but I think that's more like not saying she used the word woke, but just like putting the word woke in quotes, because who knows even what it means. And so I think that news story was kind of interpreting what she said in a way that wasn't defamatory. And then did it really harm her reputation? For defamation, you have to harm someone's reputation. And is that interpretation of what she said a harm to her reputation? Anyway, but I do agree with what Nil Gravity was saying in that follow-up tweet about the framing of progressives as the losers in the off-year election, which I've been talking about the whole live stream. And anyway, I just wanted to include that there as a backup to Cedric Richmond's response to Margaret Brennan, using the word wokeness, and the James Carville quote, and that same James Carville quote about the Democratic Party being too woke and having to go to like woke rehab or whatever comes up in Senator Mark Warner's interview with Dana Bash on CNN's State of the Union, which actually starts off with this other question about whether Biden has misread his mandate from what's the Representative Abigail Spanberger said, he wasn't elected to be FDR, but just to like not be Trump and bring things back to normal. And anyway, here's Mark Warner, senator from Virginia, answering those questions from Dana Bash and this bogus woke framing from Dana Bash on CNN over in this clip.
Once it gets out.
You're prepared to vote for it. I just want to take it up to sort of 10,000 feet and ask you about something that your fellow Virginia Democrat, Abigail Spanberger, had to say. She said that President Biden and his agenda about this, she said nobody elected him to be FDR. They elected him to be normal and stop the chaos. So are you misreading what Americans wanted out of this president, out of the Democratic caucus, Democratic Congress that is now in control?
I think what the American people wanted was to do rational, pragmatic things. That's what I tried to do when I got elected governor 20 years ago when Virginia was a very red state. I think the initial plan against COVID in March was what the economy needed and Americans wanted. I think the infrastructure investments were long overdue. But I do think coming out of COVID, when virtually everybody's life has been dramatically changed, thinking about and putting forward proposals about childcare, about preschool to get folks back into the workplace, to recognize that we've been talking about bringing down the cost of prescription drugs for 30 years, and we're finally going to do it, and recognizing we've got to grapple with climate change. I actually think that is what the American public hired Joe Biden to do. And I think once we do it, I think you'll see the president's numbers dramatically improve. I want you to listen to what Democratic strategist James Carville had to say about what he thinks went wrong for Democrats.
What's going wrong is just stupid wokeness. I mean, just defund the police, lunacy, to take Abraham Lincoln's name off of schools. I mean, that people see that. And it's just really have a suppressive effect all across the country. The Democrats, some of these people need to go to a woke detox center or something.
Are Democrats too woke, Senator?
Listen, I don't support defund the police. Matter of fact, I think you saw Democrats all around who are successful. The new mayor of New York, who you're going to have on, has talked about investing additionally in our police forces. Are there ways that we need to make that policing more community-based? Absolutely. The notion of what happened in Virginia, where there is not a school in Virginia that teaches critical race theory. But the governor-elect, Governor Younkin, stirred up the cultural pot there. I hope he governs in a different way.
Can I just stop you there for a second? Can I just stop you there for a second? That is true, that it's not in the Virginia curriculum at all. But do Democrats miss a chance to signal to parents in particular that they understand their anxieties? I've talked to Democratic candidates and others who say that they didn't really have a good answer to questions about children and not only what they're being taught in schools, but the anxiety as we're coming out of the pandemic.
Dana, I think Glenn Younkin touched a nerve that was felt in Virginia, but frankly, felt all over the country. And I think sometimes our response, yes, we need to make sure that we increase teacher pay. Matter of fact, the federal government has put more money into education, both under Trump and under Biden, in the last 18 months through COVID than ever in our history. I do think we need to acknowledge that it's been hell for every parent living through COVID, disrupting their life. I think we need to thank our teachers. I think we need to thank our school board members. And I think we needed to have acknowledged the challenge that parents have felt and that we need parents' involvement in their kids' education. And candidly, when we think about additional funding for school, I think one of the most important things we need to have talked about and should be talking about is I think a lot of those kids and a lot of folks, frankly, that have been working in schools are going to need some mental health assistance. I think the aftermath of COVID is not going to be simply solved as we get these schools reopened. But getting schools reopened does require the kind of hard choices this president has made about vaccines.
Well said, Senator. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he's...
I don't know if Dana Bash should be saying well said at the end of her guest's answer. That's not really journalistic, if you ask my opinion. But I actually do agree. I think some of the things he said were well said. And especially, I think one of the reasons the whole critical race theory in the schools argument was so effective in the Virginia election is there was sort of a hangover, a COVID hangover. I mean, COVID's not over, but a problem where parents weren't happy with the, on Fox News, they're saying, well, parents finally got to see what the schools were teaching. Well, I think parents got to see how hard it is to teach kids, but they also had a lot of problems with the schools not being open, with how long it took for the schools to be reopened, and just they felt estranged from their schools and from the teachers, and that I think gave sort of a fertile ground for the whole parents need to be more in charge of their kids' education argument that worked for Glenn Younkin in Virginia. And you certainly don't want the Republican Party to become the party of the parents as they're trying to become. But anyway, I want to move on to this next clip where it's kind of on the same topic of I don't know why Sandy is whining to my left here for no reason, but it's probably because daylight savings, where we've gone back to standard time, so Sandy thinks that it's time for dinner an hour before it really is time for dinner. So lie down and shut up, Sandy. And look, she's actually doing it. But and I'm losing. This next clip, it's kind of in the same wokeness category. It's Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press. He doesn't actually use the word wokeness, but he does ask Ron Klain both about Biden's bad poll numbers and about whether the Democratic Party is too progressive. But he means too woke. You know he means it. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here. I want to
ask you a little bit about the political fallout from Tuesday. I want to show you something from the last national poll we had, which was on this show last Sunday. And I want to show you something about the voters' feelings about President Biden and former President Trump. They're much closer to being aligned by the voters. The voters still find the former president very unpopular, 38 to 50. But this president is sitting at 40% positive, 48% negative. Why do you think that is? And what has been the cause of the president's decline here, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it's been a rough and tough year, and we knew it would be. President Biden has said this all the time. We're in a year-long effort to dig out of the holes we were left. We inherited a dead economy, 50,000 jobs a month. We're now finally back to 500,000 jobs a month. We inherited a country where 4,000 people a day were dying from COVID. That's now down 75%. So I understand that voters are tired. Americans are tired of how long it's taken to get the economy moving, to get COVID under control. I feel the frustration personally myself. I think everyone does. And I think that frustration wears on people. But I think what the American people are going to see is we have put in place the strategies, the actions to turn that around. They are in a show me, don't tell me mode. I think we are going to show them in the weeks and months ahead that we have made this progress on COVID. We have made this progress on the economy. We are past now the infrastructure bill. We can start to get going on implementing that. I think that will pay off results.
I want to ask you about another exit poll result that we saw in Virginia. It was about voters' perceptions of the two parties. And more people, 51%, thought the Democratic Party was too liberal than who thought the Republican Party was too conservative at 46%. Do you fear that there is a perception problem about the Democratic Party among independent voters and perhaps right-of-center voters, that the party looks like it's too progressive?
I don't think so, Chuck. Look, I think part of that reflects who turned out in Virginia Tuesday night. That is its own problem and issue. But I also do want to push back a little bit. Look, we lost on Tuesday in Virginia. It was painful. Terry McAuliffe's an old friend of mine. I'm so sad to see him lose the Virginia legislature. But it's also worth noting, on Tuesday night, we did get Governor Murphy, who is on next, reelected in New Jersey. The first Democrat in 44 years to get reelected in New Jersey. We held on to the mayorship in New York. Eric Adams, a great new leader for our party. We lost the mayorship in New York in 2009, the last time we had a new Democratic president. We had a lot of great, exciting Democrats elected around the country. The first woman, the first person of color elected mayor of Boston. We had Chantel Brown elected to the U.S. House in Ohio. So we definitely suffered some losses on Tuesday, no question about it. We have to learn from that. We have to do better from that. But I also think we had some wins on Tuesday. We can take some pride in that, too.
I want to ask you, before I let you go, about the court ruling yesterday on the vaccine.
So, yeah, there you see Chuck Todd's contribution to the Democratic Party to woke discussion, which I think Ron Klain did a good job of dispelling or answering that. No, I thought that Mark Warner did a good Virginia-specific job of answering it, but I mean, they all answered it in their own way. Cedric Richmond, Mark Warner, and Ron Klain. But as I said earlier, the actual clip of the week here, and this has to do with, I don't know how many of you have read this book over my shoulder here, Separated, by Jacob Soboroff, who reports on MSNBC a lot. But it's about the Trump administration policy that ripped thousands of children away from their parents, many of whom were legally attempting to seek asylum. And it's a horrible, horrible chapter in U.S. history. The American Academy of Pediatrics, I think, classifies what they did as child abuse. In some ways, and there are a lot of kids or parents who never got their kids back. Hundreds, if I recall. And the ACLU has been trying to help put the kids and the parents back together. The Trump administration gave it to the nonprofit organizations like the ACLU to try to get the kids and parents back together, because when they ripped them apart, they didn't keep the records so that they could put them back together. That's one of the awful things they did. And so the ACLU is seeking compensation in a lawsuit for this terrible behavior. And if you watch as much Fox News as I do, they have Peter Doocy first, and then I think David Spunt did the follow-up question. First, Peter Doocy asked the White House press secretary Jen Psaki about it. First they asked President Biden about it on Saturday, and he said that it was a garbage report, but then they kind of cleaned that up and later and said that it was the $450,000 payment to every individual who'd been harmed that was the garbage report. But if children were taken away from their parents, that they might have some. They might be entitled to some compensation for that. But you notice the Fox News framing here. They cut out the part where Steve Doocy says, is it an incentive to come to the border, and the $450,000, and they switch around it's out of chronological order to make it look like the way they frame it is completely biased. But then Cedric Richmond, I think, is ready for the question and really turns it back on Bill Hemmer. And at one point, Bill Hemmer is like almost incomprehensible. Like, look for the part where he talks about fentanyl and women being abused. It doesn't even make sense. But so I think Cedric Richmond gets him in the next to last newsmaker clip that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
This unwinds itself in the courts. There's still confusion on another topic. as to whether or not the government will make payments to illegals. Here's what the president said on Saturday when asked about it.
If, in fact, because of the outrageous behavior of the last administration, you coming across the border, whether it was legal or illegal, and you lost your child, it's gone, you deserve some kind of compensation, no matter what the circumstance.
So again, that was yesterday. On Wednesday, however, he said this to Fox News.
Do you think that that might incentivize more people to come over illegally?
If you guys keep sending that garbage out, yeah, but it's not true.
So this is a garbage report.
Yeah.
So within an hour of that comment, the ACLU said, quote, President Biden may not have been fully briefed about the actions of his very own Justice Department, and went on from there. Was he in the loop to begin with?
The president's in the loop, but the president said at the beginning of his administration on the campaign trail that he would have an independent Department of Justice, that he would not direct the Department of Justice what to do. And if you go back to the question was from a Fox reporter asking about whether compensation for being separated and losing a child would be an incentive to come to America. And what he was saying was that was an absurd question from the beginning. No one's coming somewhere to lose their child, to be separated from their loved one. And the question is so insensitive, disrespectful, that's what he was commenting to. And I would ask the question of you, whether you support that. I mean, at some point, we cannot, with a straight face, say that parents are willing to separate from a child for a dollar amount. That's just not true, and we should not talk like that. We keep saying we're better than that, but we're not acting like that.
If the amount's not $450,000, what amount is it?
That's for the Justice Department to decide. If it shows that it saves taxpayers money, if it rights a wrong and the Justice Department determines that there is compensation that should be paid, that is an independent Justice Department. But again, the question is, we took children, President Trump took children from their parents, and some children have never been returned. Do we think that's okay?
There are others who make the case about the victims of fentanyl abuse that cross the border. There are others talk about the women who were abused along that trek across the border as well. But just back to this amount of $450,000, that would be about 4 times the amount that we afford Gold Star families.
We don't talk dollar amounts. That is the Department of Justice. The question about whether it is an incentive to come across to the United States to be separated from your child so that you can get paid is an absurd assumption.
So there will be...
And question.
Yeah, there will be a settlement then from this administration, that dollar amount to be determined. Am I clear on that?
No, I want to be clear about this. We do not tell the Department of Justice what to do. The Department of Justice is an independent agency.
I understand that, but what you're saying is that you would be okay with the payment of a certain amount, correct?
I don't approve or justify what DOJ does. If DOJ determines that it saves the taxpayers money and it rights a wrong, then they will make the determination that is necessary. And I would assume if they make a determination, they'll come up with what they think is an adequate dollar amount.
Let's see where that ends up then. Sir, thank you for your time. Cedric Richmond, good to talk with you again. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. In a moment here...
So anyway, if you watch as much Fox News as I do, you know Bill Hemmer is not what you would call a deep thinker. And he was having problems thinking his way through the answer he was getting from Cedric Richmond there, it seemed to me. You saw the whole part about the fentanyl and women being abused at the border that seemed like a total non sequitur. And it's like he came in there and he was like, one job must get Biden guy to say we are okay with money going to illegals. He even said that, I mean, called them illegals at the beginning, and it's not just like, I'm too woke for that term, and that offends me. That's one of the wokeness things, that there are words we don't like. But calling a person illegal, it's like someone who's gotten a speeding ticket, is that an illegal driver? No, we're illegal immigrant just because if you commit an infraction or even a misdemeanor while you're attempting to claim asylum, which is supposed to be a legal process. A lot of these people they couldn't turn themselves into the border checkpoint because the Trump administration had the border checkpoints blocked off. And so they crossed the border and turned themselves into the first government official they could find and asked for asylum. That is legal. It's not, you are not an illegal because you ask for asylum. And so just that first framing there from Bill Hemmer was wrong. And then Cedric Richmond, I think, maybe this is what threw Bill Hemmer off, but totally skewered Fox News there for Peter Doocy's awful framing of that original question to Biden. And you saw they showed the Biden clip from Saturday before the previous Wednesday to make it look like there was a walk back in a way that wasn't a walk back. They did show Peter Doocy saying, isn't an incentive for people to come, which is what Cedric Richmond skewered, that, parents are going to want to get money for losing their kids. That's a real incentive for immigration. Not to mention why they're, making the long, arduous journey in the first place, because they have such bad conditions, both economic and political, and whether it qualifies for asylum or not, they have the right to apply for asylum. Anyway, I saw Lulu Girl gave me a super chat contribution while I was talking, so thanks for that, Lulu Girl. And the other thing I wanted to say about the Fox News editing there is they edited out the part where Biden made clear he was saying the garbage part of the story was the amount of the payment. And I think Biden actually kind of made a mistake in that Cedric Richmond was cleaning up, where he should have said what Cedric Richmond said, that the Justice Department deals with those settlements. That doesn't come from the White House. That comes from independent judgment of the attorneys from the Justice Department deciding whether, they're going to save money by paying off whatever they pay off rather than going to trial and having, parents come and say, they took away my kid I never got my kid back. Even U.S., there are going to be plenty of juries in the United States who are going to feel sorry for parents who had their kids ripped away by the Trump administration for, their bogus racist reasons or whatever. So anyway, that is my commentary on that. And if you want more information, like I said, you need to read this book by Jacob Soboroff, Separated, that I highly recommend. And then finally, I want to get to my last newsmaker clip. This is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz giving a brief introduction about the vaccine mandate, although they make it clear that it's employers with 100 or more employees are now subject to this OSHA rule that their employees have to get vaccinated or have to get tested once a week and show that they're COVID-free. And Martha Raddatz, in her introduction to questioning the Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, says, I know you're not a lawyer, but then proceeds to ask him a bunch of legal questions, which I think is kind of stupid. And I'll give you the rest of my criticism of this final newsmaker clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos yesterday after we watched together over here.
What we do here is provide a safe workplace for coworkers and for people going into work. And what this rule does, what this emergency temporary standard does, is pretty simple. It asks employers to have their employees vaccinated, and if their employees don't want to get vaccinated, they get tested once a week, and when they're in work, they wear a mask.
Labor Secretary Marty Walsh defending those new vaccine and testing requirements for companies with 100 or more employees. It comes amid pushback over 24 states and a new legal challenge in court. Here to discuss is the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. Good morning, Dr. Murthy. Let's start with those legal challenges. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals yesterday blocked the mandate, citing grave and statutory and constitutional issues. I know you're not a lawyer, but is the administration confident this can survive the legal challenges?
Well, Martha, the president and the administration wouldn't have put these requirements in place if they didn't think that they were appropriate and necessary, and the administration is certainly prepared to defend them. But let's step back for a moment and just look at why these are so important. Throughout our history, we've seen that we have used vaccine requirements to protect the population. It started back with George Washington, in fact, when he required troops to be inoculated for smallpox. In the 1800s, schools started having vaccine requirements. When you think about the workplace, in particular, it's so important that our workplaces are safe, that workers feel safe there, that customers also feel safe. And we know that at this point in the pandemic, when we've come so far, but we still have 75,000 cases a day, that it's important we take every measure possible to make our workplaces safer. It's good for people's health, it's good for the economy, and that's why these requirements make so much sense.
And obviously, everyone does not agree with you. At least 27 states have filed suit against the rule. One suit claiming this unlawful mandate will cause injuries and hardship to working families, inflict economic disruption and staffing shortages on the states and private employers, and impose even greater strains on struggling labor markets and supply chains. What's your response to those who say this is an overreach and will hurt the economy?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I hear time and time again from small businesses, large businesses, and workers is that what's really hurting the economy is actually COVID itself. Millions of workers have gotten sick because of COVID and unpredictably been pulled out of work. Millions more have had to be quarantined. And think about how disruptive that's been to businesses. And one of the reasons why you see thousands of companies actually already moving forward with requirements even before the federal deadline is because they've realized how important and helpful it is for the health of their workers and for the health of their businesses to have everyone vaccinated. Finally, just keep this in mind. These are not new. In addition to having done these historically, in modern times, we have required vaccines for the military. We've required vaccines in hospital systems, the ones that I've worked in as well. There are times where we recognize that our decisions have a broader effect on people around us. COVID has reminded us of that. And that's why having these types of requirements in workplaces will be not only helpful, but it's a necessary step to accelerate our pathway out of the pandemic.
And Dr. Murthy, if the law survives legal challenges, will the administration...
And enough of the legal questions for the Surgeon General. That's like I said before, I showed the clip, that doesn't make sense. And even Martha Raddatz, the thing is, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in their orders that it raises grave constitutional and legal issues. That is not the correct standard for this type of temporary restraining order. They didn't even go through the correct elements, the right standard, and I actually want to finish up the show, and I don't want to go into that whole issue, but people who think that this Fifth Circuit order halting the OSHA rule is bad news for the Biden administration. No, it's such a poorly reasoned decision that it's actually a gift to the Biden administration. It'll be a lot easier for them to fight this really bad Fifth Circuit order. And that never came up on any of the Sunday shows, and so didn't really get a chance to talk about that. But anyway, that's the final Newsmaker clip. I know I have my Dash the cat and Sandy the dog fans out there. Dash and Sandy, or Dandy as some people like to call them. I think you heard Sandy, who's lying down sleeping to my left and is my one live studio audience member. You heard her whining earlier, but earlier this morning I did take a Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip at feeding time, which I had to do early because of stupid end of daylight savings time. Still dark out, but anyway, here is Dash and Sandy around the food bowl this morning over here. So there you go, Dash and Sandy, Dandy, dogs and cats living together. Isn't that a sign of the apocalypse in one of the Ghostbusters movies? But you can, I think I've mentioned that many times before, and you can let me know what you think about the Dash and Sandy clip, any of my other clips that I picked out, my political commentary, my media criticism, all that. I appreciate all of you who showed up for the live show. I appreciate my recorded show viewers, even my comments I get on my Twitter feed that I featured this week. Down in the video description, I think I put a link to my Twitter feed, the source of all my clips, and then also a brief summary of what's in all the clips. And I've been doing that every week in the Media Mix-Up. I'll keep doing the Media Mix-Up every Monday, at least through the end of the year. And so I guess I'll be back next Monday and every Monday for the rest of the year, or maybe I'll be back sometime not on a Monday for some other kind of video. But anyway, until one of those things happen, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.